How you doing, everyone? Hey, my name is Reza and I get to serve with Athletes in Action in Colorado. I get to serve college athletes at Colorado State University and University of Colorado at Boulder, as well as serve as the director of the Ultimate Training Camp in Colorado and serve with the Denver Broncos as their team chaplain. So sports ministry is a big part of my life. It's a big part of my story. I'm so thrilled that you're with us on these digital chapels. Hey, tonight we're going to take a look at interaction that Jesus had with the man that was blind. It's found in John chapter 9. And so if you want to turn to John chapter 9 now, if you want to look at it at a later time, we're just going to examine the first couple verses of John chapter 9. And my hope is as we examine this miracle that Jesus performed, we'll be able to see ourselves in the midst of it. Because I think what's going to be exposed in this miracle is something that a lot of us wrestle with. The idea of suffering. Why does God allow suffering? What's the point of suffering? And how do we see suffering from a biblical perspective? And what is Jesus' role in the midst of all the questions and doubts that we might have? And I don't know about you, but I found myself doubting a whole lot, especially early in my journey with the Lord. As I was coming to know Him in college, I had a lot of doubts, a lot of questions. And it was so freeing to hear that God is not afraid of our questions, that God is not afraid of our doubt, and that there is an answer for the suffering that we experience. Because the reality is we serve a God who He Himself, Jesus Himself, suffered. I grew up in a different faith system. I grew up in the Muslim household, and for me, the understanding of who Jesus was pretty influenced by who Muslims say Jesus is. And it wasn't until I came in contact with some AI staff members, and they really truly taught me who Jesus was. But here's what sets Christianity apart from every other faith system in the world: that we have a Lord and a Savior and a Creator who's experienced everything you and I have experienced. And so the issue of suffering is one that brings a whole lot of questions. But I assure you, as our Lord Himself suffered, that He can identify with us. But in our passage today, we're going to take a look at John chapter 9. I just want to read a few verses, talk about it a little bit, and then I'm going to finish off and we're going to talk about some application points and how do we see ourselves the way this blind beggar found himself. We find ourselves in John chapter 9, verse 1. It says, "As He, Jesus, went along, He saw a man who was blind from birth. And His disciples asked Him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" You see, that in itself exposes so much about the human condition, that we immediately think that we are the result of all the bad things that might happen to us. And so these disciples were wondering, hey, if this man's blind, obviously he's done something wrong, or someone in his family has done something wrong. That there was a lot of pagan influence from reincarnation and just a lot of thought that was coming around in that first century interaction. But yet Jesus continues in verse 3, and He says, "Neither this man or his parents sinned," said Jesus. And they've sinned, but not sinned to cause his blindness. But then He says, "But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the work of Him who sent me," do the work of God the Father who sent me. "Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And so that age-old question of suffering, basically the disciples wondered, God, why is this happening? Jesus, why is this man suffering from birth? It's not really fair that he would be suffering. And Jesus comes back and He says, this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. It gives us a great perspective that we need to really consider when it comes to the suffering that we experience. But here's what you and I have got to reconcile before we can understand suffering from a biblical perspective, or our ailments, or our injury, or our playing time, or lack of playing time, or relationships, or lack of relationships. Or maybe you're at a school and maybe you never thought this is the way it was supposed to be. A coach left, or what they told you in recruiting isn't really happening. God, why would you allow me to sit in this place? And Jesus says this happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. But here's what you and I have to reconcile before we can talk about this idea of suffering and the work of God being displayed in the midst of it. That we've got to reconcile what we gaze at and what we glance at. Let me explain. When you're driving down the road, Oftentimes we glance at the rearview mirror, but we gaze outside the windshield. You gaze at what you're focused on. You gaze at where you're going. You glance at where you've been. So you obviously gaze for a lot longer than you glance. But here's the problem. When we gaze at the things of this earth, when our focus is on everything that happens around us in the natural world, that you and I, when we experience suffering, we're going to think to ourselves, this makes no sense. Because in the natural, suffering makes no sense. If you're in my life and the totality of our life was simply from the time that we were born to the time that we breathe our last breath on this earth, let's say we live to be 94 years old, then if our entire existence was just 94 years old, then really suffering makes no sense. But the problem is we gaze at this earth and all we're focused on is things on this earth. Yet from an eternal perspective, from a biblical perspective, the way that we can actually see the works of God being displayed in our suffering is when we simply glance at the earth, but yet gaze into heaven. That our focus is into the life to come when Jesus comes back to restore all of creation the way it was intended to be. When he can start thinking about the existence of your life, not in the span of 94 years, but 9,400 years. 94,000 years, because we live for eternity. That's what the term eternal perspective means. When we simply glance at the things of this world, we notice them. We notice the difficulty we go through, but yet we gaze, we focus, we actually somehow emotionally and spiritually, we live in the beyond, but yet we're simply experiencing the things we are in this world. The Apostle Paul puts it, and he says that it's almost like we're foreigners in this land, that we're just living in temporary houses, or we're just foreigners passing through this place. And so this eternal perspective is big as we think about our suffering. And then Jesus follows that up with this kind of a bizarre statement. He says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. So basically, and then he follows up and he says, I am the light of the world. So here's what Jesus is saying. As long as I am in this world, it is light. I am the light of this world, and there is a mission to accomplish. And so he's letting his disciples know that, yes, there is a mission to accomplish, and he is going to actually use this blind man. He's going to heal him in a bizarre way. He spits on the ground, he takes some mud, mixes it all up, and he puts this paste on the blind man's eyes. The man can then see, goes and washes in a pool, and then he can see. And then here's the cool thing that happens. This person who was blind, he goes and he tells everybody what had happened. And everyone's freaking out. And they're thinking to themselves, wait, how can he see? He's not supposed, he was blind from birth. And even the religious leaders, they were confused and they were pretty suspicious of what Jesus was doing. So they brought him in and they said, how can you see? And he says, that man Jesus, they all call him Jesus. He put some mud on my eyes, he washed my eyes, and now I can see. And there was some disagreement by the Pharisees because it was actually done on the Sabbath day. But here's what was amazing. This man who was healed, he didn't know a whole lot about Jesus, and there's probably a lot of truth to the fact that he wasn't a follower of Jesus. Even after he was healed, he had this interaction with other people saying this man was a prophet, or this man that other people called Jesus. He never called him Lord. And you know what that tells me? That tells me that in the midst of our suffering, as we journey with God, we don't have to have all the answers. We simply communicate what God has done in us and through us. And the ways of Jesus don't always make sense. And I think one of the potential reasons that Jesus allows emotional, relational, financial, vocational, or sports struggle is because Jesus is most often found in the searching and seeking rather than the results. You and I want results. We are people that are probably results oriented. If you're an athlete in any way, shape, or form, you are results oriented. But Jesus is not oftentimes found in the results. He's found in the searching and the seeking. And so you might find yourself in a place where you are confused, where you're looking at suffering and you're experiencing suffering. And you might be thinking, why, God? Why are you allowing this to happen? Here's my invitation for you. I don't know why God allows certain things to happen, but I do know this. As we experience the things that we experience, and we put one foot in front of the other, that we'll be able to see some things about Jesus and his character that would impact who we are. I remember about 10, 15 years ago, I was pretty confused in my faith and really trying to figure out what God was doing. And there's a really cool mountain hike right by my house. It's called Horsetooth Trails. And at the time, my family and I we lived close to the trail by the foothills, and I loved hiking this trail. But I wanted to do something I'd never done before because people had told me to hike it early in the morning, so that when I get to the top of Horsetooth Rock, at the top of the trail, at the top of the mountain, that I'll be able to see the city of Fort Collins, be able to see most of the eastern plains of Colorado with the sun coming up, and it's gorgeous. And so I got to the trailhead about 3 in the morning. It was still dark outside. I put my headlamp on, and I got to tell you guys, I was a little nervous hiking in the middle of the night, hiking at night, because I'm kind of afraid of the dark. I don't like the dark. The dark is weird to me. It's scary. But I parked my car and I put my headlamp on, and I'm hiking up this trail, and it's pitch black. And I remember looking down the trail, and it was pretty scary because I couldn't see anything down on far down the trail, but I could see what's in front of me. And then I took a few steps and I could see what's in front of me. And then I took a few more steps and I could see what's in front of me. And then the trail turned. And I didn't know it was on the other side of the turn, but I turned, I walked around the trail, and my headlamp lit the path just a few feet in front of me. And friends, as I did that little by little by little over the course of the 2 hours of that hike, I get up to the top, and I'm sitting on top of Horsetooth Rock, and the sun is coming up, and it's just gorgeous. And as the sun comes up, I can finally look down. I can actually see the entire trail that I had walked, and I can see my car down in the parking lot from the very top. And here's the purpose of why I share that story. Because I needed to change my position to be able to gain perspective. That I had to change my position of walking forward to get more perspective on what dangers might be coming or where I needed to step on that hike. Friends, you might be in a season of life right now where you are confused and you don't know where to turn. But like this blind man who was healed by Jesus, he didn't have all the answers. But it was in his doubts and in the conversations that he had with the Pharisees and the conversations he had with other people, he realized that his position was now different. And because his position before God was different, he had better perspective on who Jesus was. And at the end of that passage, he finally surrenders and he says, Lord, I believe in you. And so I hope that encourages you to be at a place where you are walking with Jesus, where you're learning what it means to ask questions and understand that Jesus is most often found in the searching and the seeking and not just the results.